Hey, I'm Brian Ives. I'm here with Ben Wagner, and we're talking about his new album, What's Left Behind. So you've talked about a specific moment where this album started. You were in a funk, you hadn't done a record in a while, and you were talking to a friend. And so tell me about that scenario.
So we're in my apartment, right? And the apartment's got no furniture in it. And in fact, tomorrow's my last day in this apartment, and my family's moved, right? So my wife and I have been talking about what to do with our careers and our lives and our kids for years, right? And so in a lot of ways, the subtext of the record is this like existential question of like, why am I here? What am I doing? What does it mean? Which I think we've known each other a long time, like it's kind of always part of it.
Yeah.
But I was just in the depths of that with a buddy of mine at Black and White Bar in the Lower East Side. And I just was in a spot, and he kind of said to me, in essence, why don't you write your way out of it? And what he said is, what's going on with your music? And I was like, what is going on? Like, I mean, it's only been 2 years since I put out Great Lakes. I hadn't really made any plans or done any thinking about it. So I gave myself a challenge of writing 5 songs in 3 months or something, you know, like writing and demoing a bunch. And I ended up basically doing 12 or 13. And I just was like, well, this is a body of work. I mean, it happened like that. And I was like, well, this is a body of work. So that's kind of how we got here. It was a year and a half ago. And I also took it slow, as opposed to like back in the day when we were kids, I'd be like, it's July, I need a record by November. I was like, well, there's no imperative here except I want it to be as good as it can be. So I just took my time.
But I mean, making records is a big effort, obviously. You know, I know you were never gonna like get rid of your guitars. You're always gonna play songs for your daughters and stuff like that. But at some point with, you know, your career, your wife's career, you have 2 young daughters. Did you ever, was it ever in your mind, you know, like, I don't know if I'm gonna make records anymore?
Mostly because, yes, but mostly because less the creative part, like to your point, like I have 3 or 4 guitars and usually one of them is out, and I have intentionally, I mean, you know, I made a record for each daughter when she was born. I play them to sleep because I want them to see that being creative is like part of life, whatever their, you know, expression of that creativity is.
Right.
So they're always around, but then songwriting is different than playing like, you know, a Cyndi Lauper cover at bedtime, which is Elsie's favorite, True Colors.
Good for her.
Yeah, man, kid's got good taste.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I feel like I think about it every couple of weeks where I'm like, I should just stop spending money on this. In fact, I thought about it on the way to the Rockwood Music Hall show the other night. I was like, maybe this is the last one. I was like, no, it's not. You know, like, I'm turned 50 in a little while, and I'm like, I have this mental picture of playing a show with every musician I've ever played with and putting out a greatest hits record. I don't have any greatest hits. I mean, like, there are songs more people know than others. But,
right.
You know, so for me, it's like, I like the project. I like the process, like, of making something from nothing, all the way up through the artwork and the media around it. But mostly, like, it's how I make sense of whatever's happening. And the end game is sort of secondary, because at this point, like, my wife picked me up at Rockwood Music Hall. I have 2 kids that wouldn't have happened if she hadn't come to the show, if I didn't have the website, if I didn't blog about music, right? Like, so there's all this connective tissue that it's all, you know, sort of wound together in such a manner that I don't know how I could not. But from an economic standpoint, I'm sure my wife would prefer I didn't keep going into the studio. Although, this is so on rock and roll, but our accountant was like, hey, Benjamin, I wrote down that like studio expense, and I was like so stoked. I was like, babe, we wrote it down, you know, like, because everywhere else we're hemorrhaging cash. So I just do it because I got to do it. And the good news is, like, I don't think it's getting worse. I think it's generally the songs are getting better.
Oh,
the
for sure.
recordings are getting better. The performances are getting better. There's a part of me that wishes I was this capable 20 years ago, but I wasn't. So this is how it's going to go for me, I guess. This is the story.
I mean, that's an interesting thing too, because like a lot of, you know, especially in this era, it's so ageist. That even if you had broken through when you were 20 or even 30, by the time you're 50, people are kind of tired of you, or like there's no avenue for your music to be successful. And so that's not even something that you have to worry about. And the songs you write now, I just don't think you could have written as a young guy, which I would say of Bono and Bruce Springsteen as well.
Yeah, I mean, I long ago made peace with the fact that it wasn't going to turn in some way that I fantasized when I was 15. But then I also reconciled with the fact that like a 15-year-old's fantasy is probably not that well baked. You know what I'm saying? Like, And also I hadn't spent any time in the world of touring, which I've flirted with enough to know, like, well, 23 hours for 40 minutes or whatever of like actually doing it is not a really great ratio.
Right.
As opposed to like, I have a day job, I mostly dig, I have a family that I totally adore, I have friends that mean a lot to me, I have a creative pursuit that actually pays all kinds of dividends in ways that can't be measured in the sort of ways that I would have measured them as a kid.
Yeah.
It's just not as cool as I would have guessed when I was 20, but like, that's why I'm not 20.
I mean, you probably didn't imagine having 2 daughters either, and what that would be like.
It's not part of it. I mean, none of it was part of the script. I didn't have a script. It just was this abstraction of like a tour bus and bright lights and adoration or applause or something. And it's like, well, I mean, it wasn't even about the songwriting. It didn't even occur to me like, oh, you're gonna like make better sense of why you're here and what it means and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Because of this process.
It's funny too, because a lot of artists, you know, when they get older, they'll say like, well, I'm putting out records. I would have done this even if I did it for free. And you never really know if you quite can believe that, but like you've actually given that more credence when I hear a multi-millionaire rock star say it, because you're the proof of that. Like, you don't need to be doing this, but like you do it because.
Yeah, I mean, the Rockwood show, the record release broke even, right? But existentially, I mean, in my mind, I can close my eyes and I can see it. And that will pay dividends. And, you know, it's not see it, it's feel it.
Yeah.
Right? And like see you right there and be like, oh, he's shooting something. That must be, this is okay, you know, or seeing my friend Whitney over there in the corner and like making eyes at her because she's known the whole arc of this idea from when it's just a different kind of dividend. Would I like something to catch lightning in a bottle? Sure, but I don't know, like we used to say in college, our favorite band was us. Like, I like my songs. I listen to my songs by myself, like for better or worse, you know? I'm figuring them out, including Dear Elizabeth. Like I played it the other night and I'm like, oh, like, you know, it's like some surface that has different dimensionality. As you turn it over, you make better sense. So I kind of think that's why we're here, is to make sense of it. And art is often a mechanism to do that. Yeah,
and I mean, it's just like if people paint, they're just painting for themselves. You know, and they
hope,
I mean, and they hope somebody else likes it. I mean, obviously when you're performing, it's in front of hopefully people. And so, you know, hopefully they enjoy it. But like clearly you're coming up with this stuff because you want to do it. And like you said, like I've seen you work anyway, like as you say, like coming up with the album cover and like what font the liner notes are going to be in and like what point size, like all that stuff is part of your important process to you. And if you're not creating something, I just feel like there's something in you that needs to get out that's not getting out if you weren't making these records.
Yeah, it's the making. It's like taking something invisible and making it visible.
Yeah.
Or in this case, well, both visible and audible, you know?
For sure, yeah. But I mean, there's something you can hold. There's an album that you can hold. And I mean, the funny thing about how you meeting Abby at Rockwood in the other room that you played like, it was a lot of fun, and you could use my footage watching Abby have so much fun.
Oh my God, yeah.
Like, you know, I've been at your shows before. I've never seen her like dancing around quite as much and all that stuff. She was like a fan of the music and proud of you. That's how I interpreted it.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And I always tease her. I'm like, because there were a couple of months where we'd met but weren't fully dating, and I was like, you were listening to my records that whole time. You were reading my daily blog every day, and she never cops to it in 15 years of marriage. But
that's kind of weird because that would make her know way more about you than you knew about her when you started dating.
No, the ratio was off. She absolutely came in with.
It's almost like if you went out with a famous person, like. Clearly you would know more about them than they would know about you if you weren't famous.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't famous, but I had written every day, as you will recall.
There's just enough out there that she could like really profile you more than you could profile her.
Yes, no, and she did. She won't cop to it, but she did.
Besides all that stuff, like a lot of artists, you're leaving New York behind, and I think that was in your mind the entire time you were writing these songs, right?
It was more the idea of creating change than the specific of New York. It's funny, I remember years ago, like 20 years ago, dating someone who was like, why do you keep saying city in your songs? And it was because I kept walking home from the West Village to Hell's Kitchen. I was like, because I'm walking home 80 blocks every night or every morning. It was more the idea that there was a disturbance in the force. You know what I mean? Like that there was something happening and I didn't know what it was. And as you know, like I'm actually not fully leaving New York. I'm in and out. Like I have a career here. I have colleagues here. I have a job here that I was starting not to make sense. And so, because we were every weekend going, if not there, then somewhere else. And then the sort of primary metric was always like, is it green? Can you see the sky? And is it quiet? And as I watched these girls grow up, I thought, well, they need more of that than they needed this. Like, it's great that Maggie can show me around the Met, but like she could like do that at a smaller art museum or come back here or whatever. Point being, like, that was the thing. And so it was more like, what am I going to do? What's the next thing look like? Because I've been here 25 years. And it was an accident. I didn't come here on purpose. Like, my brother said, you want to come to New York? I was like, sure. You know, like,
what else am I going to do?
That's right. I was like, well, if you're going, I'm going to lose my roommate. So the first song really addresses that in the chorus wall is like, maybe you really want to change. Maybe you'll never know, comma, if you don't, right? And like that you only lose what you can't let go is like, either the thing happens to you because you avoid agency, making a choice, or the thing happens because you chose it. And I was like, I'm just going to choose it. That song is the first song for a reason, because it's like a declaration. It's like the finest work song. It's not document. It's like it sets.
That wouldn't be the
tone.
fifth song. It has to.
That's right. You wouldn't put finest work song at the end. It's like the thesis statement or something. And so to me, it was just like that funk. I can't put my finger on what it was. I just know that there was, your unconscious would be like, it's like a dream. You have a nightmare for a reason, I think. And it was like, what's happening? And I had to just dig into it and figure it out.
But you've found a real community here, like Jamie Jamie Lionheart has worked with you before. Obviously, Chris Abad has been like, it feels like you're consigliere for a really long time. And, it's interesting to watch him grow into his own artist and be a great front man. Tony Maselli, I always talk to you about his bass playing, how fun it is and how bouncy it is. Is it weird to not be in the same town as them on a weekend or something? Because I'm imagining that's when...
I'll let you know. I mean, one of the things I said to Abby is, and I would say this applies to you and I, is I think you got to fight for your relationships. And so we keep up pretty frequently, largely via our phones, checking in, saying hi,
because we want to.
Listening to. That's right. And so to me, I said, because Chris and his wife Megan have given us a lot of guff about this choice, in a like loving way. Particularly his wife Megan. And what I've said to them is like, well, I'm going to fight to stay in your lives. Like, it's important to me to stay in their lives. And the same thing is true about, it's funny, I was talking to Matt Curry, the dude at Rockwood, and I'm like, you want to give me another Tuesday in like September, I'm in, right? So like, I'll keep a presence. It's funny, when I left Saratoga Springs, I left Syracuse, there was a time when I was still present, but New York's also a different beast. Like, you can stay plugged in. And so I plan to stay as present as possible, particularly in Tony and Chris's lives. We've already got Labor Day plans with them, I'm already pitching him playing in my brother's backyard next summer, so we'll see. I mean, that's part of the idea, the change.
Got it. And so will the new house have a garage?
Good question. I have 3 criteria, and the final resting spot for the Wagner family or the new HQ is TBD. But my pitch or my only requests have been, I would like a decent kitchen, because I've found in my older age I enjoy cooking for people, right? I want a vista. Now, you can see out here, you can see there are some buildings and a little bit of sky, but mostly it's just buildings.
Mostly buildings.
And 25 years is the best I could do, 2% sky. I would like sky, like sky and trees. And then finally, I would like either, I'd like both. I'd like a basement where the instruments are always set up.
Right.
And we all got dibs. Like, I'm telling you, dude, we drive down the highway, all of us take an instrument doing like free falling. I mean, and I'll be like, Maggie, you're on guitar, Elsie, you're singing, and they all do it. So I have this idea that at some point, Elsie's gonna play bass, Maggie's gonna play drums or whatever, and Abby can sing, by the way. And then I need a space, and I got all my art for it, because Lord knows my art is not allowed in the main part of our house. All my shepherd fairies and crazy stuff. To have a legitimate recording studio and creative space to write and record, and maybe bring a 20-year-old on and say well, let me help you demo.
Right.
That would be, and I've thought about teaching songwriting. Just turn off the editor, get out of your own way.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it unfolds. But I definitely have some visual ideas of the kind of creative space I hope to have at some point. I used to record in the walk-in closet. I can't even do that anymore,
I mean, you could if you had to, but you couldn't record drums in there.
No, I mean, exactly. I mean, and even it's stuffed with everybody's stuff now.
Yeah,
when
yeah,
I was
yeah.
alone, I could do it because it was just my stuff.
But Jamie recorded in there.
That's right. Not here. A couple of years ago.
All right.
Yeah.
You told that story on
So
stage
is
the
Chris.
other
So
night.
is Chris Abad. I mean, everybody's recorded in my walk-in closet at one point or another.
It's a rite of passage in New
You'd
York.
be surprised how good a walk-in closet can sound because the clothes are all around you.
Yeah, totally. So I wanted to ask about the 3 cassettes or 4 cassettes and like sort of how they permeate, because you cover Yaz.
Yeah.
REM has been like something that's been present in your life for a really long time, and The Cure surprised me.
Yeah, and so the story is, and it's a true story. My brother came back from his first summer living at the beach in college with cassettes. It was like the 80s, late 80s, in his brown Bomber, Oldsmobile, Cutlass, whatever. The Cure's Head on the Door, REM's Reckoning, which is interesting, right? Because not Murmur. David and David's Boomtown, of course, their only record, and Yaz is Upstairs at Eric's. And each one of those just ended up being seminal, the least of which was The Cure, except The Cure colored my perspective on kind of like, I don't know what an outsider can look like, and what like, because he's super poppy, but like looks, not at all down the middle, right? So I've done, South Central Rain, Second Guessing, and then on this, I'm going to release a single for Heroes, and as you know, I closed with Heroes the other night. It's hard not to, man. I mean, I also borrowed Dewy-Eyed from David and David. So in Back from Waterloo, I say Dewy-Eyed Saboteur, and he says, I don't know, Dewy-Eyed Guitar Players or something like that. Their presence in this album cycle, I did a cover of Only You with Jamie, which we did like last. I mean, I did it 2 months ago.
Right.
So they all found their way back, but by accident.
Yeah.
I wasn't like, oh, here's what I'll do. I'll do a cover of, everything from those cassettes. It was more like they just found their way back to the surface.
It's funny, I mean, because The Cure is such outsiders, and you don't come off that way,
Me and my blue Oxford shirt.
But it's weird though, man, because it's like I was listening to Bruce Springsteen's new album that came out a week and a half ago now, and it's like, where does that even go today?
Yeah.
He's one of the biggest stars in the world, sold out 200 something nights on Broadway, sold out 3 nights at Giant Stadium a couple of months before that, but like, where does his new music go? Like, he is now an outsider.
Yeah.
And like your music, which could have comfortably sat between Jackson Browne and Bob Seger on a rock station in the 70s or 80s, like that doesn't exist anymore. So you sort of are an outsider in a way.
Well, and the other thing is, I think almost everybody feels like an outsider at some point. Like,
that's true.
Even like, I mean, I don't know, I was the student council vice president. My friend Heather was there the other night, who was the president.
Oh, right, yeah.
Like no one who I knew in high school would say, oh, he didn't feel like he was part of things, but you just do. That's just life. Like the human condition, I think, is often to feel not always part of the thing, right? The zeitgeist or the moment or so. It's just not difficult for me to relate to that sensibility.
I think star athletes probably feel like they are the zeitgeist when you're in high school.
Yeah. I'll never know.
Yeah, but most other people wouldn't. But it's like, I remember hearing like somebody describing the band Matchbox 20 as corporate rock, and it's like, I don't know, Rob Thomas got in a lot of trouble in high school to hear him tell it, and sort of didn't fit in, and like, it just so happens that his favorite records were Genesis' Invisible Touch and Van Halen's 5150. Not very outsidery records.
Which has almost as much to do with when he was born, though, right? Like, I mean, there's something about the timing, of things. Like, I can't help that I liked that Phil Collins No Jacket Required record because it was fucking huge at the time.
No shit in that
like
game.
It was a big record.
Yeah. Sometimes by the time you learn that it's not cool to like it, it's too late. And
this is why we've always gotten along, because what's cool was never a big criteria for us.
Sure.
It's more like what's good or not even, because good is a judgment.
Yeah.
What feels
resonates.
Right, So I back to the Head on the Door and The Cure. I mean, those songs are poppy as hell. They're verse, chorus, bridge, verse, chorus. So in a lot of ways, there's this song structure across all 4 of those records that's standard, even Upstairs at Eric's, but none of them are straight pop songs.
Right.
Like and that Yaz record is like synthy pop, like super poppy, but then there's like Winter Kills. You remember that song? It's super bizarre. So I don't know, there's like enough sensibility that's outside or non-linear or not Invisible Touch, which by the way, I loved.
Yeah. I love Invisible Touch.
I went to that concert Paul Young opened. If you're gonna be swayed, not you, if one is gonna be swayed by
the royal you.
Yeah, like what is and isn't, and I think that takes a certain amount of courage to not sweat what's cool. I'm with you, like whatever, guys. Like,
I mean, it's weird though because you've worked at the epicenter of cool for a quarter of a century at this point.
Have
like
I?
you were at Rolling Stone.
Yeah.
You were at MTV for longer than anybody that I know has been at MTV, and now you're at Facebook. And it's sort of like everything that those brands represent communication on a mass scale, which is something I think everybody, there's good and bad parts about it.
Yeah.
But it also represents sort of an obsession with what is hip, what is at the moment. And it's unbelievable to me.
It is funny, right?
I mean, I remember our boss when we worked together at MTV. Yeah. At some point, like you didn't have a TV, and we worked at MTV. And at some point, I remember distinctly him saying, like, "It's not cute anymore."
That's right.
Like I think everyone thought, "Oh, it's so funny. He doesn't even have a TV. He can't watch the VMAs or whatever." And then it was like, "No, you've got to have a TV to have this job." And you sort of like resisted that until your boss actually told you go buy one.
Yeah.
And I also distinctly remember like you playing James Taylor in The Office, and he actually told you to shut it off. But it just sort of like that to me almost totally encapsulated you, that moment, because you're like, well, I'm this big deal guy at MTV, and we're writing about, we're looking for new Eminem stories every day. We're looking for new Marilyn Manson stories every day. We're looking for all this like cool, hip, edgy stuff. But like, I don't care. I like James Taylor.
Yeah. Oh, it's just
that's your aesthetic.
Yeah, I think it's cooler to not sweat what's cool. I also don't think about it much. It's just like, and now more than ever when Discovery is basically just a series of clicks.
Yeah.
Like I just listen to it and I don't really, like, does it matter that he's Mr. Musgraves? Not really. I mean, I just think the songs are great.
Right.
Does it matter that Jason Isbell, I don't know, connects to, Shreveport or whatever, the sort of roots of that sort of Skinner type sound? Not really. I just think his songs are amazing.
Right, yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? And he seems to share a similar aesthetic, which is like, this is all I can do, and it works for me. That's why we're pals. And he was wrong about the James Taylor. I mean, where's Marilyn Manson now? I mean, comfortably sitting in some
some dungeon
Beverly
somewhere.
Hills dungeon, right?
But it is pretty amazing though that it's James, like that was 1999. It's 2019. James Taylor could still sell out Madison Square Garden.
Sure.
Like I don't, like some people would say, well, he's not relevant. But to me, my counter to that, like somebody could say the Rolling Stones are not relevant. If Charlie Watts, their drummer, is pushing 80 years old. He's 78 years old. That band has been around for 55 years, and they could sell out 2 nights at a football stadium handily. The only reason why they're not playing more dates is because they physically can't do that many dates. But
I think what, I mean, you know this, the media, because we did this.
Yeah,
still do it. The media needs new.
Yeah.
And I mean, the irony is I could be a great little bit of new if somebody wanted, but like, oh, how about this guy? We missed him for 30 years. Or his earlier albums were terrible, but this one's great. But ultimately, that's, I think, the challenge around relevance is actually the delta of new and compelling. It's like, I gotta be honest, I couldn't tell you what Billie Eilish sounds like, and maybe she's great, but mostly it's some combo of new and some pastiche of elements, I presume, that creates some kind of currency that, I don't know, like, if at the end of the day, I got married and had these kids as a result of picking up a guitar when I was 19 and writing songs, that's a
enough.
Sweet outcome.
Yeah, for
you
sure.
know? And got to have a conversation with people who I respect because they know music and get to play a couple of rock shows where people are legitimately enjoying themselves and afterwards say, I'm so surprised. I thought you were just kind of like fooling us and you were some kind of hack. I was like, no, it's kind of the real deal. So like it's all gravy. I mean, that said, I'd be happy if it would blow up. That'd be fine, but
I was like, we got to get some of your songs in front of Miranda Lambert or Eric Church or one of those Nashville guys. Or who knows, maybe David and David will see this. They might need an opening act.
I'd be happy. I mean, I think I do Heroes quite well.
Yeah.
I think I'd take it to a whole different place, right? A little melancholy.
Totally, and like, I mean, they're presumably going to tour. Like, there probably aren't that many artists today that are name dropping them, and you are.
That's right.
So it's like, if I was them, I'd be like, that guy knows who we are. Let's get him.
I also do a very fine Swallowed by the Cracks.
So I know you don't want this to take 2 hours, so I'll just ask about the aesthetic decision to start and end with a song called Walls, which are 2 different songs.
Yeah. So I was listening to a ton of Tom Petty when we were making the record, and it was so apparent to me that his songwriting, both sonically and lyrically, was virtually timeless. And I thought that was a great bar. And the other thing is I was listening to that song on repeat over and over. And there's so many little bits of it that I love, like, you know, the idea of like, you got a heart so big, it could crush this town. Like, I love the vulnerability and the, like, it's like this, it's almost like the scope of the scale of those things don't match. And, and you know, some days are, you know, like diamonds, some days are rocks. The idea, like, I just felt like I was going through this kind of experience where some days I was like, this is great. And other days I was like, this. And it just spoke to me. And I just thought it'd be a neat song to cover, and then wrote Walls by accident. I was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll write a song called Walls to start the record. That's not how my brain works, you know. I just started strumming a D to B minor, and that's what came out of my mouth. And I was like, well, that's screwy. I don't know if that's okay. And then I thought, well, maybe they're bookends. And for a while, I moved the Petty song around. And then ultimately, and actually this has something to do with the fact that the code is there, right? Like, so the code is like where the full band comes in at the very end of the record. Like, a code is like when you think it's going out, like Matthew Sweet does it in, I don't know, Sick of Myself maybe?
Yeah.
Like it just keeps refraining, right, yeah. Because Walls number 3 doesn't have the coda. Walls, the circus mix, does, right? There are 2 different mixes of Walls. I know I'm getting deep cuts on you. But Petty has 2 versions. And so number 3, I just was like, well, if the coda comes back, that'd be a fun little tag at the end of the record, particularly if I brought the full band in. Because Walls number 3, the band's not in there, but then the coda, the band comes in. So anyway, I just thought it was an interesting framing device, since I feel like that was what I was, part of what I was managing here, is whatever it was that was in my way for, again, agency, for saying, I'm gonna change my station myself. As opposed to, and it's funny, I meant station as in position, but it's funny in terms of like radio, right? Like, I'm gonna change, like, if I can't create it, who will? Like, you know, there's this idea in Est of the drift, the idea that we're all just like kind of going down the river. And it's like, well, am I gonna paddle? Or am I just gonna drift? And you know, you're incumbent to both, but it was all this kind of reconciliation of like, this is it, dude. You're in charge of you, so what are you gonna do? And that's kind of where I was coming at with those as bookends. And I'm glad you noticed. I mean, how could you miss it? But I hope it works. And that Petty song's just, I mean, it's
that
gold.
song in that era, like, I could see you covering Wildflowers. But like most of his earlier songs have too much of a sneer for it to really work for you.
Yeah, I don't sneer a ton. That's one of the things I liked about Walls number 3 is it's fairly earnest.
It's beautiful. I mean, it's a song, it's almost a lullaby that you could sing to a kid. Whereas most of his songs have like a lot of like grit and spit in them, kind of.
It's almost like a life lesson, right? Like it's basically like some days are up, some days are down. It's 3 verses of that, right? And that's just sometimes a really critical thing to remind yourself. I mean, if you think, like, there's a lot of day and night on the record, right? Like, daylight follows, like, there's a light and the day always follows the night, always follows the day, right? Like, sometimes you just got to know that, yep, the sun's going to set and then it's going to rise and you get a restart. And on the worst nights of your life, sometimes you just got to remember you get to restart in the morning.
You get to wake back up and try it again, and you can only try and be better.
Yeah, at least for another 40 or 50 years, knock on wood.
For sure.
Thanks, bud.